Welcome to the Land's Weekly News Report. In a Gleaner article on Monday, the Nurses Association of Jamaica stated that they're trying to negotiate a livable wage for nurses. They're stressing that the 2.5 wage increase for public care workers public sector workers is not enough for nurses to be incentivized to not potentially leave the country, as Jamaica is the third least paying country in the Caribbean when it comes to that profession. The nurses are also working towards getting further for other forms of compensation in various private deals. However, they rightfully chose not to elaborate further on what those other forms of compensation are. In a Radio Jamaica report on Monday, the World Health Organization says that tourism-dependent economies should not use economic reasons to open up quickly, as it could risk more transmission and potentially spread the virus. Of course, this isn't really news. I mean, it is a virus that transmits from human to human, and therefore, if you have a human that has the virus from another country come into your country, then that would stand that the humans in your country would now be able to get the virus. It's very straightforward, I'd say. I'd say that overall, tourism is a generally extractive form of sector of the economy and largely does not actually serve the society that is getting the tourists in any meaningful sense. It mostly creates dependencies upon the country that tourists are from. For example, the United States of America. So, An Observer article on Monday spoke about the Boundbrook project, a 140,000 square foot project, almost half of which will be dedicated to a BPO space, a call center. Yeah, the problem with BPOs in particular is that these companies, one, they don't intend to increase pay at all. If they do increase pay, they would rather than increase pay, they would go and leave to go to another country. Also, these contracts for most of the call center workers are short-term, one-year contracts, usually thereabouts, that they have to hopefully renew and rely entirely on the whims of the call center itself to determine whether or not they will continue to have a job after a year. Of course, another reason why this one-year limitation exists is so that the BPO can actually continue to pay its workers the lowest possible wage that they can muster by saying, well, this individual has only worked for us for the past year. Even though they've been working there for, say, multiple consecutive times, it's only a one-year contract, so it doesn't count. It's essentially trying to subvert the actual laws in which people should be compensated more for the longer that they work at a place. Another element to the Boundbrook projects, of course, is the creation of a railway, which is actually very useful. However, it does give this colonizer vibe, if I were to really put a finger to it, because it kind of reminds me of the history wherein, of course, during colonization, in the period of enslavement in Jamaica, we had essentially the best roads being dedicated to taking sugar, because we were a sugar colony, directly from the plantation straight to the port. There wasn't really that much in between that was necessarily nearly as well paved or as well taken care of. And I feel like this is essentially the same thing, except, you're just trying to carry workers to and from the workplace. That is the only thing they're meant to do. At least that's the vibe that I get. There are a couple other things that they plan on doing at the project. For example, they do plan on having government spaces and a museum, and they plan on making it green and stuff like that. But, do I care that much about exploitation if it's green exploitation? At the end of the day, I want to see the destruction of these exploitative systems and forms of extraction from our country, our economy, our people. And according to Nationwide News, in an article on Wednesday, a UK senior diplomat stated that the UK isn't going to pay reparations because the enslaved Africans are long dead. Of course, also in the article, Professor Vereen Shepherd claps back. She's a social historian and points out that not only is this statement very contradictory to many of the international bodies, such as the UN, and their claims, which actually goes to say that the descendants of these forms of colonization do deserve some form of restitution for what had occurred, but also says that the reason why he's doing all of these things is so that the UK does not have to pay reparations for the things that they had done. She also goes on to speak about the fact that Jamaicans do know our history, that we do understand things, and that this statement by this senior diplomat is quite a diss to Jamaican people. She also says that it's on par for the course for what senior diplomats do and the things that they say, because they are generally trying to uphold this very racist, she doesn't say this part, but this very racist, oppressive system. So of course they're going to say very racist, discriminatory things, right? This is the only way to continue to maintain it. And so gladly we can recognize that this statement that's being made, sure, he's saying that there won't be repayments of reparations. We know why he's doing it. We know where it's coming from. It's not something that is necessarily this massive unfounded position that the UK has never had. It certainly is trying to push it, but we know that a significant part of wealth is generational wealth, is being able to have this lineage of, oh, well, my father had X amount of money, my mother had this amount of money, and I was able to start my business because they were able to give me, a small loan of a X, Y, or Z amount of money. So it's really not that big. It's really strange of an argument in many elements, in many respects, to say, oh, well, it happened a long time ago, it doesn't matter. These things have generational impact, right? History isn't just isolated events, but is a very continuous cycle of series of interactions. In a bombshell report on Sunday from The Guardian, revealed that there are governments surveilling their citizens via hacking software produced by the Israeli company NSO Group. And by citizens, I mean politicians, union leaders, activists, and even their own family members were being spied upon. In the context of Jamaica, we have already confirmed that there was an Israeli cybersecurity firm that was awarded a contract for similar types of technology, though we aren't entirely sure who precisely it was. We can speculate that it was CSO. Generally speaking, a lot of people were essentially saying it was CSO, but it wasn't public, so it wasn't said. Of course, Jamaica doesn't have its hands clean with regard to spying on potential political activists. For example, Walter Rodney was someone that was very heavily spied upon, and he also was eventually barred from re-entering the country. He was declared persona non grata, and the reason why was because, of course, the US told their puppets in Jamaica to watch him, and when they felt like he was at a point where if he continued to do what he was going to do, it would undermine the systems that they had in here, they said, no, it has to stop. He can't be here anymore. So we have to kind of look at that. Of course, much of the technologies that we deal with today are actually very much dedicated to espionage. Even the quote-unquote security technologies. For example, the internet itself was created initially as a means for more efficient information transfer between various apparatuses of the military-industrial complex in America throughout the Vietnam War. They recognized that their projects were not able to go across as quickly as possible because of how much information they needed. But even with all of this information that they get across from all of these positions, it doesn't really... What we find is that over history, the movement that wins isn't necessarily the one that is even more technologically advanced, but the one that is most organized. In the case of the Vietnam War, We know that the Vietnam had won, is winning, is continuing to thrive. And the reason why they were able to win the war was because they saw the ways in which the empire was responding to them. They reacted to those conditions as they necessarily could, based on what they understood through a proper analysis, and that's why they managed to win. And oftentimes the reason why these imperialist forces want to attack a country is so that they can make them their own neocolonial extraction sites. And if you choose to not be a neocolonial extraction site, well, you're going to continuously be under siege by these imperial powers and attempted to be undermined every single step along your revolutionary process for self-determination within your country. This is an example. On Monday, there was a Reuters article talking about the fact that the UK... On Monday, there's a Reuters article talking about the fact that the UK backs Juan Guaido as president of Venezuela and that they therefore cannot return $1 billion in gold that was stolen in the first place. Of course, this is very intentional, especially during this time of economic downturn due to COVID-19, but also the blockade, and it's causing much political strife. I mean, they intentionally are causing the currency to devalue versus the US dollar so that when they give money to their counter-revolutionary forces in Venezuela, it can carry for far further. And we even see forms of espionage and, well, not just espionage, but just straight up piracy when it comes to Venezuela trying to trade with other countries. For example, Iran and Venezuela trying to trade oil between each other so that they can support each other. US stealing that and selling it. Look it up. So really, it is not something that is that surprising, if I'm being completely honest, with regard to the way in which empire functions, with regard to the way in which they choose to do things, because this is how they always think. We have to ensure that we steal your things, that we have control over it. We'll then use that to even exploit you further so that we can have even more things, because we need more. We need to have this extractive, destructive relationship with everything around us, including ourselves. So now let's go over some very positive wins for the leftist movement within the Global South over the past week, particularly in the Caribbean and Latin America. On Monday, Socialist Castillo was officially confirmed president of Peru. Finally, it was literally fascism versus socialism, and of course, the people won. The opposition was trying its best to give this appearance of, oh, well, it was stolen, blah, blah, blah. But none of the Western powers, not even the Western powers, decided to back it. There was a lot of anti-communism that was thrown out, but it just didn't seem to really stick. I'm not entirely sure why. It's definitely a situation to watch. However, this is still most definitely a win. On Sunday, Mexico donated 80,000 syringes to Cuba to assist it in its fight against COVID-19. Due to the genocidal blockade by the US, the story of Cuba's fight against COVID has mostly been a fight against the impact of the blockade. Cuba now has 5 different vaccines in trial, with over 30% of their population at least partially vaccinated. However, the primary limiting factor to their vaccination program isn't doses, but syringes. Even with all of these already existing issues, such as dealing with the blockade and the pandemic at the same time, the US is continuing to further aggression. Early on in the pandemic, the US made it difficult, if not impossible, for Cuba to receive remittances from Cubans living abroad, and even more recently, the US orchestrated a color revolution. However, as expected, Cubans were ready to come out in full support of the revolution and came out more organized and in larger numbers, essentially beating out any sort of idea that this was something that was organic or truly backed by the mass of people within Cuba. Of course, Western media generally spoke about it in terms of, oh, look at the tyranny. Of course, there were even not ministers. Wait, what are they called in America again? People. There were even people in positions of power. There were even senators in America that were entirely willing to say, oh, look at how impressive this is, and blah, blah, blah. But in reality, none of it stuck. None of it was really meant for none of it really was able to challenge the strength of the Cuban Revolution. And this is precisely why it is so important to create organization, why organization is so strong, why even well beyond, the rule of the more prominent or more popular figures in the Cuban Revolution, we can still see it continuing to maintain itself today. If you're more of a spiritual person, you'd say they never died, but that's a story for a whole other day. Thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in more information, check out our site at jalands.org. That is jalands.org, or on Twitter at lands_ja. That is at lands_ja.